just out of curiosity, type some wrong user ID and password, it's funny to see that I'm able to be, I mean, of course, assuming that this is not fake, but I just know how it works, that they are saying, hey, the username with that ID does not exist. When you think about it, oh, holy shit, I'm able to check the valid or invalid usernames in that system. What best practices say, and it's actually common sense, is to say wrong combination of password and username, because that way you will not expose the very fact that there is such a user in the database. Hello and welcome to Dev Academy podcast, your gateway to the insights and wisdom of prominent experts and engineers from around the globe. I'm your host, Bartosz from Dev Academy, and it's my mission to help you glean insightful knowledge from the vast experiences of our distinguished guests. Each week we will delve into timeless topics in software development, focusing on crucial areas like security, quality, and design. Join us as we unravel the complexities of software engineering, offering you a practical, in-depth perspective. Let's embark on this enlightening journey together and transform the way we create and understand software. Hello and welcome. Today we have Borja Berastegui on the show, and we are going to talk all things security. And before we jump into the topics that we anticipate, can you just say something about yourself and what it is in security and software that you are about, Borja?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me, by the way. I really appreciate the invitation. So I started in cybersecurity as a pen tester in a consulting firm, which was, to be honest, a really good experience. All my colleagues there were super smart, and my experience there was great. I learned a lot. So after a couple of years doing pen testing, I got the opportunity to relocate to Tokyo, to Rakuten, to work in Rakuten. I also did a lot of web application security, and I got my hands more into the SDLC security part, like automating tools for performing security checks during the development process, things like that. And I got the opportunity to see other things outside the pure penetration testing. After that, I got the chance to join King, which is a mobile gaming company, well known for like games like Candy Crush, for example. And there I was hired as a security engineer, mainly doing penetration testing and vulnerability management, anything I had to do with what it's sometimes informally called offensive security. So red team exercises too, things like that. And from then I kind of evolved into the left side of the security process, right? So a little bit more into the SDLC on how to actually prevent things being discovered on the pen test phase, which is like the last phase of the entire security pipeline. So that's me.
Great. So it seems like you have been on the wide variety of positions and like an entire spectrum from offensive to defensive, from tooling and development. That's going to give us, I would say, interesting perspective and view into the topic. So before we discuss the technical stuff, I would ask you one question. And if you could time travel, would you go to the past or to the future? How far away from today and why? If you could just, do this and you travel in time, assuming that it's possible, and where would you go and why?
Oof, that's a really philosophical question. I was not ready for something like this at all. So probably the past, I would like to see a lot of history-related events. I don't know exactly where, but I don't know, maybe around like between the First and Second World War, something like that. I would like to see how Europe looked like on that era. If you ask me why, I really have no idea. I kind of improvise the answer, and I think that's what feels more interesting, because if you go way past, way too back in time, life was really complicated and risky, I would say, right? So I would like to go to the medieval ages, because, well, like it was. I'm sure that it was really, really difficult to live by. So those years. So.
I would say medieval times are exciting as well to see, all the histories with castles and, medieval strategies between kingdoms and stuff like that. But I get it. It is a lot of risk involved in that times to be alive, right? Compared to nowadays.
Oh, well, also another option, another like pretty interesting option would be Roman Empire, right? Like we constantly think about the Roman Empire, so why not go and visit it?
Definitely, definitely. I'm very big fan of the history movies, history. So it's
Hmm.
nice. I like to ask this question, and you will be surprised how many different answers I receive asking about this, idea. And it's interesting to see how differentiated opinions and ideas people have.
Yeah.
Okay, uh, let's start small. Let's start like scratching the surface to set the ground. And from your experience, because I believe you have a lot of expertise in that field, we will dive deep, starting with the simple question. I would say, what do you think are typical security mistakes that you often see in web application development, and how developers can be more aware of that?
The good thing about this is that I can give my personal opinion and my personal view on this. I'm sure that someone else will think differently, but I think like the most boring issues are the most common and the most impactful. So something like unmaintained pieces of code or unmaintained applications, right? Like legacy stuff that is hanging around that nobody knows, nobody is familiar with the code anymore. Things like that are probably the highest risk and the most impactful security mistakes that you can see nowadays, right? So if you build something from scratch and you use any new or any kind of modern development framework or language, it's pretty easy not to make like big mistakes. But if you have a piece of an application that is processing something that has been there for years now and nobody has touched, I'm sure that that application or that specific feature of the application will have much more vulnerabilities. So my take on this is simplify and reduce the what is called in security the attack surface, right? So the size or the amount of places where you may have problems, just cut that to the minimum, and it will be much easier to first to just avoid introducing new issues. Second, to control yourself, right? Because you will know exactly where your risk is. And it's going to make everything much easier to handle. So that's my personal take. Just simplify as much as possible, like cut as many fat out of your entire chunk of applications as possible, and simplify it.
So, assuming that we are talking about this old piece of software that has been there for years and it's doing some business, can you point out some specific things that this piece of software can expose to the wild that is able to be?
Again, trying to think on like the most impactful things, because when we talk about like web application security, we hear a lot of like cross-site scripting, for example, right? Or a lot, well, SQL injections not that common anymore, things like that. But some things that are extremely impactful and sound really simple are the authorization issues, right? The IDOR vulnerabilities or insecure direct object references. So it literally means accessing something that you should not be able to access, which if you think about the context of any web application, if it has a login feature and it has some sort of segmentation between what one user can see and what the other users should be seeing, breaching that limitation is usually like really impactful. And depending on how your stack looks like and how complex your application is, it's not that complicated to just forget about checking one specific cookie or just checking specifically authorization when accessing one specific endpoint in the API, for example. And if someone discovers that, then well, think about like any big web application that can come to your mind. Like I'm thinking again, like same big names here, like Uber, PayPal, Twitter, whatever, right? What if someone on Twitter is able to access your DMs, or someone on PayPal is able to see your balance or your account details? Or what if someone in Uber is being able to access your profile details, things like that? So I think that's the most common thing that we see nowadays. Again, taking into account the impact, right?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned insecure direct object reference, right? So the situation when you have a limited access to the given resources, like your account, your DMs, your piece of data, and some unintended person might be able to access this data, or potentially entire database, just enumerating the IDs or another handles or references that should be somehow avoided. And that's completely true. I would say that the unauthorized access to the pieces of the data that should be limited to the given people is a very important thing, and it's easy, especially in the large systems, to find these problems that are not addressed. And then it's just one thing, right? So there is a lot of other things that we can talk about. It's a lot of different parts to that. But if you think about SDLC, so software development lifecycle, you mentioned this at the beginning. So how can we think about SDLC to avoid as much as we can? Because we probably cannot avoid everything, but we can minimize the surface, as you mentioned as well, to minimize the attack surface. What practices do you find, according to your experience, that developers can adopt to enhance the security, to have this secure SDLC process? Before we continue with our insightful conversation, I'd like to share something that I'm really proud of: the Web Security Dev Academy Bootcamp. I created this program to help developers like you deepen their knowledge in web security. If that sounds interesting, you can join our exclusive waiting list to be notified about the next launch and start receiving tailor-made security tips. This is not a usual online course, but group-based cohort training with my direct support. To join the waiting list, visit websecurity-academy.com. It's websecurity-academy.com, or check the links in the description. If Bootcamp isn't quite what you are looking for at the moment, there's another way to support us. Please consider rating this podcast on your preferred platform or leaving a comment on YouTube. Your feedback is incredibly appreciated and helps others discover our content. Also, if today's conversation sparks any ideas, or if you find it useful, don't hesitate to share this podcast with friends or colleagues in the tech community. Your endorsement helps us reach and inspire more developers. Thanks for your support, and now back to our conversation.
Again, sadly, so I'm a really technical person, right? I come from an extremely technical background. I've been doing pen testing myself. I still write a lot of code because I like coding, and sadly, the solutions for most of the issues are the most boring ones. So in this case, for example, having developers that are aware of security issues is priceless. Like when you have people actually creating code that know the things that can go wrong, and they are really aware of it, and they take that into account when they write code, or even when they review code from other people, when they talk about the architecture of a new application or things like that. Again, super boring, right? Like training, awareness, but it works. It works really, really, really well. And it's always the best way of solving issues, like as early as possible, right? Like as leftist to the left as possible. So I would say that's one, like awareness and training. The second one would be architecture. If you take into account all the pieces of architecture, so again, kind of simplifying things, making sure that all the input for the application goes via like one specific method or one specific API, and you don't have people just receiving inputs in different places, because it's really, really easy that you may have 80% of your developers like properly trained, they are super aware of security, they take into account a lot of things, but then there is someone that is creating one specific feature in the application that for any reason they just spin a new API endpoint that processes input in a different way, and it's not controlled, not filtered, whatever. Or for example, it's not using the same authorization checks than the rest of the people. So if you are able to kind of architect the application properly and make sure that the authorization model is one and that authorization model is shared for everyone, and the input like flow is one, and everyone knows how to process input to the application the same way, it's not only a good way of preventing, but also a good way for detecting and for reacting in the future. If you need to actually see what's happening in your application and everyone kind of follows the same principles more or less, it's going to be much easier to just do any change or react to absolutely anything malicious. So
yes, definitely the points about the inputs and how you actually process the data that flows into the application is very important. But this actually reminded me about what one of my previous guests was saying when they were doing pen testing to one of the application, and it is extremely mind-blowing when I think about it. To simplify, they were trying to find, during the pen test, some potential issues, and there was a situation when you could upload a file, and what they found out that the file was uploaded to the server in the temporary place with a random ID. So what they did, and it was just for the sake of validation. They were uploading the file, checking if it's okay, and if it's okay, processing further. And I'm not that into the technical solution to this problem, but what they found out is that when they upload the file, they needed to guess that random name. So they calculated, okay, how many different possibilities we have, and they brute forced the random name, like the hash.
Well, because it was not fully random, right? So that's why they were able to. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So they knew the way the random pseudo-random value was generated. So they knew what possibilities they needed to check, and they found the potential position in the file system that was actually accessible via web, which is completely, if you have Apache, right, you have different folders, and there are some folders which are obviously exposed to the public, right? So the system was uploading it to some random path, unfortunately for them, to the public directory. Then they needed to brute force all the possible random names, and with some additional steps they were able to upload the file, put some malicious remote code execution inside of that file, and then they exploited the entire app, because once you have RCE, it's done, once you can have the remote command execution, then you can compromise the entire system. But the steps they needed to take were very complex, and only experienced pen testers know where to look in the holes. So I completely agree that the way you input the data is a very huge risk factor, and you should be very focused on how you, regardless if it's some user input, file upload, or any other way, API consumption, whatever it is, right, that the system is able to consume, is very critical to be very crucial, very cautious when it comes to how the system is reading this data, right? So that's just one story that I remember. So
actually, sorry, let me add you another anecdote to this, because we were saying like awareness and training is realistically one of the best things. I'm not a developer myself. I work in security, and I guess like a big chunk of your audience are developers that are interested in security. So the fact that there is people listening to these kind of things and they hear us talking about specific examples, that will make them think about features that they have implemented or pieces of code that they have developed that may be affected by these things. And this is like, again, priceless. This is the best way of discovering things. And that thing that you just mentioned about like the pseudo random generator for like a URL token or whatever, I recently saw another example for this, actually on one web application that I was using myself, where I saw that there was like a really big and looked kind of random URL which is usually called like tokenized URL, which means it's a URL that it's kind of just really difficult to guess because it's random, right? But the last part, like the biggest part of the URL, was weird. Like it really looked random. But I got caught by that, and I was looking through it, and I was like, I don't really know what this is. Like, I don't know how they generated this random token, because sometimes it's kind of obvious, right? It's like a hash or something like that, which again, if it's a hash based on something that is predictable. So for example, if you make a hash out of a file name and then you use that hash as a reference, people can just generate hashes for known file names and try to find out if you have hosted those files, right? So for example, if you have a I don't know, which are like a standard file name for something like secrets.yaml, for example, and you don't want anyone to access that, and you use that hash as a reference to access this secrets.yaml, I can generate like hashes for common file names and then hit your API with them and try to find if you have any of those files. So, and again, going back to this application specifically had like a really long sequence of bytes, but I realized that it was a really simple chunk of bytes that was just kind of encrypted in a really simple way that generated a really long string. So you just needed to go back, generate the file name and the path that you needed, do this sort of, again, weird encryption and convert it to bytes, and then access the URL, and you were able to just enumerate files the same way. So I'm giving this example because if someone can think about features, API endpoints that they have, where they have used this, if you use the source, if your source is something that is predictable and it's just like one step, so the person that is trying to attack your application is just that step far from being able to enumerate your files. So the only thing that they need to do is to find out how you generated that URL. And once they find out, they're able to access all your files. So take that into account.
I think that it's worth to stay on this topic for a while, because you mentioned a very important thing like enumeration, and I think we can bring this topic into the light. For example, I still find out applications that when I, for example, just out of curiosity, type some wrong user ID and password, it's funny to see that I'm able to be, I mean, of course, assuming that this is not fake, but I just know how it works, that they are saying, hey, the username with that ID does not exist. So, so this actually rings a bell, right? Because when you think about it, oh, holy shit, I'm able to check the valid or invalid usernames in that system. What best practices say, and it's actually common sense, is to say wrong combination of password and username, because that way you will not expose the very fact that there is such a user in the database, because this is very easy then to use some automated scripts to find out more information. When there is a reconnaissance done by the malicious actor, they may know way more that they should be informed about. What is your take on that?
Well, there's one thing that I would like to mention on that. You said like it's kind of common sense. It's not that common sense, and well, that's one of the reasons why people like me have jobs, right? Like my job is actually thinking full time on things that can go wrong and how to fix or mitigate it. But on the other hand, I could never build a huge Java-based like proper application myself. I can just write some code, I can do scripting, I really enjoy it, but the same way that like a really experienced developer is able to build that huge application, well, we can think about security, but it's not that common. Like people is not that familiar, and it takes a lot of time to be on top of all those things and to have all those things on the back of your head. So I think that's where we find this kind of like nice mix of, again, when we're talking about Java or like the internals of JavaScript or whatever other language, I'm not that an expert, but I know the things that can go wrong. So I can go to someone that is more experienced than me and then say, well, this is what I think from the security standpoint, but you're the expert. What would be the best way of solving this issue that I explained to you, right? Well, anyway, that's one of the things that I wanted to say, because the people that work in security, we usually tend to think that we know better than others, and it's not the case. Again, I would never be able to write a huge application myself, and something that scales to a decent size. So this being said, I completely lost track of the question. I forgot what we were talking about.
No, okay, so let's make a step back and agree on that everybody lives in their own bubble. A Java developer who is an expert in scaling the systems may not always think that what can go wrong, but then you comes into play when you're saying, no, I will be not able to build such an application, but I can try to find the holes in the entire picture and try to help you be more aware. And I don't know yet how to fix it, but I at least am able to see, because as a security expert, you have the nose to find those different parts that the developer, when it is, the process of building software focused more on the business value and the technical excellence, this security part might not always be always, in the air. So I'm developer myself, so I may also agree with your point that you're so focused on the on the business side, you're so focused on the technical aspects, on the architecture, on the solution, on the different things, but you may, because I said it's obvious. Maybe it's not that obvious when you think about it this way, that you should focus on so many things during the development that maybe you just don't recall yourself that when you do this way, it might be wrong, and then the security experts jumps in and finger points this issue. Because I said, I thank you for this, because you corrected me. Like, maybe it's not that obvious. Maybe when you think about this right now, it seems obvious, but if you are in the development, bubble, it may slip away.
Yeah. And I just remember what you were mentioning about the username and password error, right? So when you go to the login and you input, So when you go to the login, you input email, password, and it says password incorrect, but the email is valid, right? I think like years ago, my former boss told me, when I was starting with this, they told me like the username and password pairs are 2 pieces. So if you're able to guess the email, you only have one other piece left. So it's like 50% of the work is already done. At least that statement helped me to frame that in a really constructive way, right? Because sometimes as a security person, you need to be able to, I think it's critical, not sometimes, you always need to be able to actually explain people, why do you think that is a security issue, right? I've had a lot of like security reports in front of me, and I was reading the vulnerabilities and the issues, and I was like, this is not a problem. Like, why are you telling me that this is a problem? This is not a problem. But you go like in autopilot and you just flag everything. You give me like a 80 pages report full of stuff, and half of it is useless, right? For everyone out there that is working in security, that is listening to me, please just make sure that you understand why you are adding things there. Because if someone goes and asks you, why do you think this is an issue? You must be able to say, well, I think this is an issue because if this and this happens and this is not fixed, this would be the impact of it, right? And for example, we have a lot of people that run automatic tools and they just report issues, whatever they find. And it's extremely important to give context, because if not, the work is like you're not actually helping at all, and you are going to just flood people with the stuff that they don't care about. So going back to the username and password thing, think about this, right? If someone is able to guess if the email is on your database or not, and they find out that the email is valid, they can just go and search for that email in a leaked password, email and password database, and they just try that password because they already know which email to look for. So it's half of the work.
Yes, I completely agree, and I would even add more on top of what you mentioned, that if you know that the email is there and you're halfway through to get access to the system, Of course, assuming that there is no second factor, which it should be, like some authenticator, one-time password, or any other factor that is the second piece of the authentication of the given user. But I think that it's interesting also to mention that not only but also, that what you mentioned, that, okay, let's check if this email or this user is present in some leaked database, because other system could be already compromised. Assuming, let's make a simple bet. You found out the username on Twitter, and okay, you're trying to compromise this account, and you look for the leaked database, and that particular user already had an account on the system A, B, C, D that was completely trash, and you find the old password from that particular account, and for some reason it happened to be the same password, or maybe credential stuffing, right? That you are trying to guess that all the possible cases from that email listed on other breached data leaks, right? So I agree that you should also be able to reason why you think it's an issue. And I think we are completely on the same page when it comes to knowing the email on the system, that it is definitely reasonable to mention it. Hey, red flag, sorry, fix it. And then if you don't agree, here is a list of issues that I can present to you why this is an issue. The next question would be, I think we just scratched the surface of the secure SDLC. You mentioned the security awareness and security trainings. Is there anything also more technical that you find, like scanning or auditing? But maybe before more technical stuff, you also mentioned reviews. What do you think is the good security review? Peer review.
I think if you can do an architecture review with someone that is like security minded, if you have someone in your team that can help you with security, if you involve them in the development process, it's going to be just easier for everyone, right? Like easier for them to spot the stuff and easier for you to avoid issues in the future. So that's on the pure, again, review. Threat modeling. So threat modeling exercises, again, something that sounds really, really boring, not really techy, but it's extremely useful. For those that are not familiar with what threat modeling is, take a look online. Like there's a lot of really good documentation, even they're like frameworks in order for you to follow things, and you don't even need to be a security person. Like you can do that as developers yourselves, and it's a great exercise. It's literally sitting down with the architecture of your application and thinking on all the things that can go wrong, all of them. It can even be really fun, like actually thinking on, well, what if in this step of the authentication part, someone goes back 2 steps and then changes the parameter and then clicks moving next again, right? And then you enumerate all those things, and then you kind of answer yourself with, well, nothing's going to happen because we check this, and this. And a lot of times you spot things that you haven't thought about. Well, because you were doing the application, which is a huge piece of work. You need to take into account a lot of things. So doing threat modeling exercises, again, nothing really is like really technical and really fancy, but it's extremely useful. And it's not that boring, right? It's not like an audit where you sit down and you go through a checklist and things like that. Threat modeling it can be really fun if you do it with the right people. So that's one thing. Then if you can add any static code analysis tool to your code, I think that's great. Like I think that can help you a lot to spot things in a big application that you really were not that aware of, because sometimes it's really difficult to tie all those pieces together, right? And maybe you're doing a piece of code that you think is like harmless, but then you lose track of the flow of the data, and then you realize that you have something in one specific part of your application that is like flowing into your function that can cause you some trouble. So if you can integrate a static code analysis, please definitely take a look at it, because it's really pretty straightforward to integrate nowadays. All those things, all those tools have become much more simple and user-friendly than before. I remember the first static code analysis that I performed like years ago. There were not that many tools, and it was a proprietary tool that took hours and hours to scan the code base, and it returned a gazillion false positives. And we just had to go through the entire report and see, okay, this is a false positive, this is a false positive. And sometimes you even got like critical findings, which made you have to review the entire source code to make sure that it was a false positive, because if not, well, it was a critical issue, right? But nowadays, all the tools have improved that a lot. So I encourage everyone also to take a look at that. Integrating something in your pipeline is pretty straightforward. You can integrate it with GitHub and open issues for the specific findings, and do some testing. Just evaluate the tools, see if they work for you. Don't put them as blockers on the development pipeline until you are really, really sure that you're not going to get too much noise or it's going to cause too much pain. I tend to be extremely realistic with that. Unless you are a company that sells security, the business needs to operate, right? You cannot just jump in and say, well, like if something happens or something appears in the security process, whatever it is, we're going to stop it until we review it. Well, I'm sure that you'll eventually piss someone off and security will be just moved out of the picture. So.
That's great. So security awareness, security training, code review, focused on security, sometimes being a little bit of, finger pointing, asking, hey, what happens if we have this parameter? What happens if you have this value? And then we have security scanners, static code analysis, automated checks. But what happens if we find an issue in production? You mentioned a very important thing, that you're not going to close entire business and say, oh, we have a security issue, we need to close the entire factory and we're closed for 24 hours and the business is down. It's not going to happen if you have a very important piece of the software in production that is making money or doing something that is critical to the business. So we have an incident, right? Or I'm trying to understand if we should talk about the discovered issue, or we go wild and go even more hardcore, and then we already have an incident. What do you want to start with? Do you want to do you want to talk about the not exploited issue that you find, and then or you want to talk about the incident, which I understand as already exploited thing that already happened? Because there are two different things, and both of them, I guess, have different approaches to mitigate and fix. Yeah,
actually, we can start with the best scenario, that is you finding a vulnerability yourself, like doing a pen test or so, and we can talk about that.
Sure. So let's split it. First thing is that we find it. We hope that it's not exploited, but on the other hand, we can talk later on the already exploited thing, and we call it an incident, that some really bad thing happened, and we have an incident, and we need to make some procedure. So first thing first, you make your own red team thingy, and one of the testers say, you know what, I find this issue because we have cross-site scripting, whatever, right? And how do you manage this vulnerability? And we assume that it yet not had been exploited.
Okay. I was the one that told you you should not try to block anything if something security related arises, but there must be exceptions, right? Depending on the criticality of what you find, you must be able to evaluate the risk and the impact of the issue that you found, and maybe you need to bring something down. But even that ability to do it may be hurt because you've been telling everyone in the past that everything you found is critical, right? So if everything you found is critical, and then one day something is more critical than what you said was critical, you probably won't get support from anyone in the company. So that's why I tell everyone just to be cautious. Like, don't tell everyone that everything is critical, because one day you are really going to want to push something as critical in terms of like, we need to shut down production until we fix this. And if you've said that something was critical like 30 times in the last year, nobody's going to pay attention to you, right? I actually made a couple of decisions like that where I was like, well, is this critical? Like, even though maybe the public announcement, like the CVE of the vulnerability is right, that's critical, like, we can take 48 hours or 24 hours to fix it. We don't need to take anything down. Then let's go and do it slowly. But on the other hand, if you find an authentication bypass in your main application, you're a SaaS provider, right? And your entire business is based on your SaaS and the trust of your customers. You really don't want any of your customers to be able to access other customers' data, and you find an authorization bypass. Well, if you need to take down the application for a couple of hours until you fix it, it may be worth it. So I think I lost track again, right? I think that was the first part of it.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, we said that.
You mentioned that
So
we need to evaluate the risk and not be
Yeah.
so shaky or shouty every time
Yeah.
you find something, because one day when really bad thing happen, you may not be understood or taken into account, because if every day everything is serious, then nothing is serious, right? And then you need to prioritize how serious is that, and probably during some meeting decide with other members of the team if you should just give yourself a time or shut down the production because it's too much of a risk. So going further and making situation more extreme, let's say that there is an incident that already is being exploited. You look into the logs and you see that, oh my gosh, we see that someone is pulling out the data like crazy because they found this insecure direct object reference, and you look at HTTP logs or you look at any other form of logs you have, and you see, oh, they are pulling entire database, and we see ongoing incident. How do you react to this situation, assuming it's Friday
You're making me
afternoon?
sweat already. So this is not an easy answer, because there are a lot of depends, right? Depends on which sort of data is being extracted. Like, it really depends on the incident details overall. But in order to be able to answer something, instead of just saying depends, first of all, I'm kind of cheating. I'm going a little bit in the past. You should have an incident response playbook. You must have something like that. So anyone that is listening to me, if you don't have anything, just draft something together. Like, if we discover that we had a security incident, what are we going to do? Right? Just sit down together with some people in your organization, maybe with the CTO. If you have a CISO, I'm thinking about organizations that maybe don't even have a security team, right? But like, put something together in order to be able to know what are you going to do if something happens. Who do you need to reach out, in which like situations. Also, that's going to help you to evaluate if you have the ability to detect it or not, if you're able to collect the logs, and also if you want to take response, if you want to respond to the incident once you have detected it, who are you going to be able to reach out, if that team has on call. So kind of evaluate in paper if you're able to respond to an incident or not. But going back to the specific scenario, in general, there are a set of frameworks that will help you to structure how are you going to respond to an incident, right? But once you have identified it, the first thing that you need to do is to respond to it. So if you can contain, that'll be great. So first of all, try to restrict the access, try to reduce the blast radius. So for example, if one of your servers was compromised, and you can isolate that server in order to be able to avoid that malicious, like that attacker jump to other servers and make the mess bigger, do it. If shutting down that service is going to help you, do it. And in parallel, just have someone collecting as much information as you can get on the details of what that person has done. You will also have to identify how did that happen, right, in order to avoid it, because I've seen several cases like all over the world in different companies. Some of them made it to the news, right, where they thought that they had reacted to an incident, but they still had the attacker in their network. So they just did an entire cleanup. They just got rid of everything. They fixed the vulnerability, whatever. But the attacker had created like a valid user in a server, and it was just connecting back to the server, right? And they were not able to do that. So sadly, like proper planning is what's going to help you the most. Like being able to get the logs, to identify the scope of the attack, to reduce the blast radius, to eradicate the attacker, make sure that you have removed any traces from the attack, and then rebuild or relaunch the service. So one of the reasons why it's important to identify how that happened is because you may have gotten an indication of the attack from a live server, for example, right? And if you don't know exactly how that happened, you're like, okay, just burn the server down. We see that like the attacker hasn't moved anywhere else but this server. So just reboot the server and that's it. It will just rebuild again from scratch and it's good, right? But what if that person has gotten like credentials to your cloud? And that's how they got access to the server, right? So you spin a new server and then the attacker is back at it again because they have access to the cloud. So that's why it's important for you to identify it, because if not, you're going to keep chasing ghosts here and there and you're not going to get rid of it. So it's not an easy thing. That's what I say, like it really depends on the entire scenario, but preparation is
the critical part is to have a plan, incident response plan, so that nobody gets panicking and stuff like that. Minimize, first identify the source of the blast, try to isolate. It's kind of like if you see the building on fire, you are trying to locate the source of the fire, you are trying to isolate, and you are using a distinguisher and point to the places. But as you mentioned, the problem is that if you have multiple places burning and there is some room that you are not able to see at the beginning, that okay, I see outside of the building that this window is exposing a lot of fire, so probably you should focus on that. You distinguish the fire in that room, and then you enter the another, and then there is already hole in another wall that is putting another danger inside. So I guess that there is not an easy answer, but first of all, having a plan and being able to isolate and identify the source of the incident is critical. And assuming that you get rid of the fire, how do you make this post-mortem lesson learned? I think it's very important as well, because one of the frameworks that I know from the threat modeling is that you answer 4 questions, and I get it from Anderson, who was on the show before, who said there is one framework which I find, thanks to him, very easy to understand and learn. You ask 4 questions. What are we building? So you understand the business. What can go wrong? What do you do about it? And what you can learn from it. If you are able to answer those questions, in this case, now we are already on the question number 4. We know what we are building. We try to anticipate what can go wrong. We knew what we should do in case of the issue, but it is extremely critical as well to be able to learn from it, make this kind of post-mortem. Okay, we fucked up, right? we allowed the fire into the building. What should we do today in order to not have the situation in the future, right? So I think it's super important. So how in this in your experience, this kind of activities to, if we stick back to the building metaphor, you may say, oh, we should have had the, anti-fire doors. We should have a system that is able to pour the water from the top of the building. We should have an alarm. We should have maybe some security cameras. Maybe we should have another detectors. So these are the things that the society in general works to improve themselves. If they see that this really can go wrong, we experience that damage. We are going to do the best we can to avoid this in the future. So what would be the relevant situation when it comes to the incident in the system that we have unauthorized access to the user base, for example?
Yeah. Actually, so going back to what you just mentioned that a previous guest commented, I think that approach is really risk management focus, right? Like it's understanding the business and such, that is like getting a bigger picture of it. There is actually another framework. Again, like this is like, there's plenty of documentation. You can search for things like this online, like a ton. If you go more specific about the incident management part and someone now is thinking on, I need to draft some sort of incident management. Again, just having a shared document and knowing what you're going to do is like a huge advantage. And there are some guidelines that also cover the post-mortem side. So I think SANS is the entity that created the PICERL, the prepare, identify, respond, contain, eradicate. I think I'm missing something, right? But the last step is lessons learned, and actually it tells you, once you have got rid of everything, once you got rid of the attacker, you should have a lessons learned, and you should be able to identify, why did this happen? Like if we just discovered this by mistake, or we didn't have any visibility, or maybe we failed in the response process, right? Maybe you said, we identify everything, we were able to detect the attacker or whatever, but it took us hours to be able to respond because the team that should be taking down the servers doesn't have on call, things like that. That should be like feeding back into your incident response playbook. So like you can check on that SANS structure for incident management. That I think is a great guideline. To be honest, I used to be really reluctant on like standards and things like that because it's boring. Like there is actually an XKCD comic strip that talks about the standards, and they're like two individuals talking about standards and saying like, I've seen like there are a lot of standards about this thing. I think they all suck. So I'm going to create my own standards. And now they have like 21 standards instead of 20. So this happens a lot. So if you can just find something that is already defined and is going to help you like a structure, whatever you're going to be doing in a much better way. So that's it.
You said that the approach when you have those 4 questions, what do you do in the business, what can go wrong, what can you do about it, and what you learned, you referred to it as a risk management approach. So why do you think it's a good approach to have this kind of risk management and understanding the business from that side critical in terms of the security?
Again, this is something that it's real life. I'm going to reiterate the fact that I'm a really technical person, and I was born a pen tester, and I have done my decent share of pen testing. But I used to think that these things were useless, right? Like risk management and things like that. And again, like paperwork, standards, whatever. There are a lot of them that are still useless. Don't get me wrong. I still think that that's the case. But proper risk management is really useful, because if you think about all the things that can go wrong, the list is endless. Like there are an infinite number of things that can go wrong that you would like to fix or change or improve or whatever, right? But you need to start with something. You need to prioritize. You need to say, well, this is like out of all the things that we have, and with the resources that we have, what are the things that we're going to be doing first? And in order to make that priority, you need to have this like risk management perspective and say like, imagine that you say, we have like 8 internal servers that are running really old versions of Windows and have a lot of critical issues. Well, okay, but how accessible those servers are? Well, you need to be in the internal network. Okay, and what are you going to get if you actually exploit them? Well, no, they're just like building security systems that just control the heating and whatever. And what if I get access to them? You will be able to see the temperatures on the building. And I'm like, okay, so how is that a big risk for the business? It is not. But if you have one big web application for your customers, that it's where you're making the money, and then you have absolutely no way of ensuring availability of the application. So the application can go down like this, and then you will stop making money. So I think that should be addressed before fixing your 8 servers that are going nowhere. So that's what the risk management helps you to do. Actually put together all those things and say, well, probability, impact, calculate the risk and say, this is not really that impactful. So screw it, right? I'm going to be focusing my efforts on something else. Another thing that I'm going to just drop here that I think is useful for people to build that doesn't require really specific like security knowledge and can help you a lot to prioritize security stuff. It's what is called a risk register, right? So you just create a list of the things that you know you need to fix, and you score them. And you're like, okay, so what we were saying, like we have these servers that we know are unmaintained, we know they have vulnerabilities. Okay, what's going to be the probability, what's going to be the impact, calculate the risk. Not much, right? And you get a score. You can do it in an Excel spreadsheet. You can do it in any tool that you would like. And every time you think about something, you just add it there. For example, a risk could be we have a specific function in our application that is where everything is rotating around, and we have one developer maintaining it. That can be a huge security risk, because if this person gets sick tomorrow and the application goes down, who's going to fix this service, right? Like, nobody. Well, maybe that will help you actually visualize which are the most important things for you from the security standpoint. Again, super boring, yes. Useful, yes. So
a lot of boring topics today, but this is the real life, and I get what you mean. But can you agree with me that if we talk about the incident response plan, you mentioned just take something and just make a plan. Do you agree that this is better than, we don't have any framework. We don't know any framework. We don't know any procedures. We are just getting started. And would it be better to have just a simple doc file with the steps to mitigate the incident? Because we don't know any standards. We don't know any better than just having nothing and be blindly fixing. Is this a better approach? Just have at least something to be prepared, like, I don't know, a 10-point checklist, right? That check this, check that. That is probably more intuitive than standardized, because we don't know better, than having nothing and just waiting for the fire. What do you think about this? Because we don't know yet how to do the best. We just take a doc file, put some lists, and we hope that this will be better than nothing. Is that true?
It is definitely going to be much better than nothing. And do it with someone. Do it with someone else in your company, someone that knows a little bit about the business, a little bit about the tech stack. So do it with your CTO, do it with your teammates in one of whatever meetings. I'm sure that everyone has tons of meetings now, right? So get one of those meetings and actually put them to a good use and make that brainstorming, because I'm sure that everyone will have something to say, and someone will mention something that you'll be like, oh, okay, I haven't thought about that, right? What if we have an incident on the weekend? And then people would say, well, we don't actually have anyone that is going to be looking at the logs on the weekend, things like that. So brainstorming, like, again, usually people can think about this, and thinking as a group and having like a diverse set of views helps a lot. So put something together. It's much better than not having anything. It's going to help you greatly.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about WAFs? Do you have any experience, positive or negative, about web application firewalls? Let it be
Yes.
Cloudflare, whatever you can name. How can they be helpful? If yes, how? And if not, why?
There is nothing bulletproof like nowadays. So if you hear a vendor that tells you that it's going to save your ass, sorry for the wording, but like it's going to save your ass 100%, like all the time, well, that's not true, right? So a WAF is a tool that you can use that may help you for a lot of things, but it's not going to fix the vulnerabilities in your web application for you, or it's not going to avoid the exploitation of the vulnerabilities in your web application for you. One good example is, imagine that you have a vulnerability in your web application that you are not made aware of, that you have a WAF, and someone finds it. But before exploiting it, there needs to be some poking around, right? So you need to check something, like send some sort of input, see the response. So there's going to be a bit of back and forth before the actual exploitation happens. So a WAF can help you detect that, right? A WAF can actually flag if someone is poking with one specific section in your application, and you may not be able to detect it. Even the WAF may be buying you a lot of time, because it may be making the exploitation much more complicated, right? And just not allowing the person to try the exploit to the vulnerability and getting the response back, so the attacker is not able to see if the attack is working or not. So it's going to buy you some time, but eventually, if this person wants to exploit this issue, they are going to find a way to bypass the firewall, to bypass the WAF, and then they're going to be able to exploit the application. So again, it's not going to fix it for you. It may buy you a lot of time. Even in some cases, it may just deter the attacker, and the attacker will just give up and say, well, I cannot exploit this, and you will still be able to see that you have that vulnerability and then act on it. So that's my take on the WAFs overall.
I see. Do you think that the WAF should be raising a flag, for example, in the case as simple as port scanning? Because
Nowadays,
you can just pull a simple nmap in front of the application and doing the not passive but active port scanning. Do you think it's enough? It's just out of the blue question. Do you think it is enough risk for WAF to start yelling at DevOps that something is wrong?
Alert. There is a concept that is called, again, if I'm not wrong, alert exhaustion. That is when people get way too many alerts and they just don't look at them, right? Another point that I think is much more important than what it looks like. If you're getting way too many alerts, eventually you will just stop looking at alerts. And if you get like a valid alert, you will just miss it. So if you have a WAF that is poorly configured and is yelling at you all the time and is dropping alerts every time you get any aggressive port scanning, I think it's useless. Like nowadays, if you expose something to the internet, you are going to get a lot of scams. So if you keep getting alerts from your WAF, you will either ignore it or disable it, and you will be in a worse place. So I don't think it's a good idea to have something that is extremely noisy. That's why I think like having tools that have a lot of false positives is really risky. If you don't take care of them, it's really risky because people will just eventually ignore it. So.
That's a good point. So I have a final question in regards to our discussion. What do you think is the rising threat that we have 2024? We have, internet that has been there for many years, and everything is online, from your gym membership, banking, insurance, and even I have seen some applications that are monitoring how well you brush your teeth with your electric brusher, so you can see your trends on how you brush your teeth. So it's everywhere. So I mean, I would try to ask the question that in the era of web applications and APIs and internet in 2024, and developers and pen tester going, if you as a security guy and a developer go hand by hand, they make a great match. So if they are working together, is there any major rise of a given types of the problems, or a given problem space that is going to be more and more problematic in the upcoming years?
This is not an informed opinion, so it's going to be my personal take on this.
That's the question. It's a question
yes,
for your personal opinion, because
So
everybody have different experiences, and there are different answers. So let's try to extract your experience on this topic.
For companies, we're going to have the same things as always, like phishing and like social engineering attacks, because cost effective is the best thing, right? Is the best way of actually getting access to a company. You may have a super advanced security team, and then someone from one random team will just give their password to an attacker because they called them on the phone and ask for the password, pretend they were the IT support, right? So some things as simple and as stupid as this are going to keep working. They are getting better and better with time. Even like the web phishings are better and better now. I don't want to say any buzzwords, so I'm not going to say that buzzword that we see everywhere, but that thing that you guys are all thinking about, that's going to help phishers get better and more effective and be more trustworthy. So that's going to make the things a little bit worse, I think. And also what you mentioned about like the micro applications and the fragmentations of like applications and web applications for everything is going to create, in my opinion, like another, well, it's already created a huge issue, but it's going to create like a second round of problems, because the likelihood of Google getting hacked and your Gmail password being leaked, it's really small. But the likelihood of someone hacking your local gym application and getting access to your password is much higher. And I'm sure that you're using the same password in a lot of different places. So I think that's going to become a big issue in the next, well, again, this is nothing new, right? But I think it's going to keep being a big issue. I'm trying to push everyone that I know to use a password manager. Like, password managers should become a standard, like the same way that you use a browser to browse the internet nowadays, or you use like, I don't know, WhatsApp or whatever other application to chat with your people. You should have a password manager. Like the idea of the password manager should be a standard for absolutely anyone owning a piece of technology. So that's, if I have to recommend something to like individual, like to my family, to my friends, I keep telling them this: just use a password manager. Just don't reuse passwords. Remember one, that is the password manager password, and that's it. Like, but don't use the same password anywhere, because you're going to run into this problem eventually.
Yeah, but the social engineering and phishing and skimming and any other, social engineering and mix of the technical problems are still going to be there. They are somehow mitigated, but it's more or less on the human factor that it's going to be always a risk factor. And it's more on the awareness part than to find some super effective WAF or any other tool that is going to prevent, because if you break human, then you can break the system, because it's on the frontier of any system, right?
Yeah, the layer 8 that they call. In the OC model, you have like 7 layers, and the 8th layer is the person. So if you are able to breach the 8th layer, you're good. So
that was a great conversation, and I think Borja is a great expert, and he shared with us a lot of insights from the experiences that he had from pen testing and security engineering. And thank you for your insights, and hope to see you soon.
thank you so much, Bartosz. Bye.